I'm sure that Labour will definitely be very interested in those figures, but we spoke with Mr. Aremu concerning that, and he said that they are due for a review in another 1 year. They're supposed to review every 5 years, so by next year they will be due for another review. And thankfully, it's an election year, so let's see how that works for Labour. But I'm very interested in the first narrative. When you talked about 6% unemployment rate compared with what we have, which is well over 20% now. Some people also say, are we also putting into cognizance the figures? I mean, by that I mean the numbers. Because if you're looking at 6% of what population, of what working population, of course by now it would be much bigger. And then, these problems, as you said, they've been accumulated over time. The government has spent time explaining them and seems to be making efforts in tackling them. How would you rate our efforts at tackling unemployment?
If we were to go by the numbers, our efforts at tackling employment at best would be described at the federal level as weak. And why would we say it's weak? It's May Day, and again, for reference, the first organized Labor Day was in 81. Mm-hmm. We had a population in 1981 of 75 million. Those figures are from the United Nations Population Division. Now, what's happened is over the years, we've failed to look at the key things that have caused unemployment, and we focus so much on infrastructure. One of the things that has really caused employment is the issues of income, and that has really, to get a better picture of it, let's look at our poverty rates. When people are poor, again, children will only go to poor schools.
Or go to no schools.
Or go to no schools. Mm-hmm. And eventually they'll be unemployable. To make it very, very easy, if 38%, which is the current case, if 38% of adults are poor, which virtually is about 40%, it simply means that 40% of future labor force will be unemployable. And if we don't want to go too far back in history, we look at our labor force as at 2006, and then we look at it forward, whereby the labor force in 2006 was 57 million people. Within 5 years, the labor force had grown from 57 million to 67 million. However, the number of jobs that were created within this period was less than 1 million. The impact of this really is that the probability of getting a job for a young Nigerian man and woman is less than 8%. With this kind of figures, we clearly see that our rate of progress has to be faster. One way to do that is, which I've said, improving the funds that go into the manufacturing and agri sector. The second thing we need to look at is we need to learn from history. If history tells us that there was a point in time where the country had an employment rate of as low as 4%, we need to ask ourselves what happened then. What happened to banks then? In 1981, when we had unemployment at 4%, the maximum lending rate in banks then was just 10%. We need to learn from history. Unemployment was 4%. What happened? Banks were lending at no interest rate that goes above 10%. Today, interest rate is as high as 25, 26%.
What about asking ourselves, at that time, if it was really 4%, the margin of error in some of those figures and the scope, so the challenge of getting accurate statistics?
Well, all these figures are from the National Bureau of Statistics. All these figures are from the Central Bank of Nigeria. All these figures are from the United Nations Population Commission. What these figures allow us to do is, we shouldn't put them on our shelves. We need to look at what we did right that really impacted on employment. We need to look at what other nations are doing right that impacted on employment. You look at the similarities between countries that have high income wages and countries that have low income wages. You have the best countries, the countries with the highest income incomes in the world, Luxembourg, Australia, and France, the United States, the United Kingdom, they have high income age, their minimum wage are the highest in the world. And you look at how that impacts employment in those countries. What you will find out is the countries that have the highest minimum wages are the same countries that have the highest number of migrant workers. So in the countries that have the highest minimum wages, you have more people coming into these countries than leaving these countries. Now, when that happens, when foreigners come into your country, there's transfer of knowledge. They bring in new ideas. These ideas set up new businesses and create employment. That is what the minimum wage does. So if you're on the list of countries that have the highest minimum wage, foreigners are attracted to come in, and the evidence suggests it. Now, if you look at countries like Nigeria, that have among the lowest minimum wages in the world, Nigeria, Zambia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Niger.
What about the income rate in the world? Where does it rank?
No, the income rate in the world also ranks quite low. But what you will have is, because you have this group of countries with low minimum wages, what you will find out is what the data suggests is, in Nigeria, you have more people leaving the country than those coming into the country. And this is not just peculiar to Nigeria, it is peculiar to countries that have low minimum wages.
Yeah, but there's also the part where people say that countries with pretty low minimum wages are supposed to attract investors because it means labor is cheap, and one of the costs of setting up a business is far lower. So what you find is that even in countries where the minimum wage is quite high, you find that a lot of the businesses are leaving there to countries where labor is cheap. For instance, you find clothing factories relocating to places like East Asia or South Asia to set up businesses in Bangladesh, in India, and China to ensure that they keep going while they export the things back to their own countries. It should be an advantage for a country, that's what I'm trying to say, in terms of bringing investors. But when the infrastructure is not there, and it makes running business, for instance, if you do not have electricity, it definitely doesn't run to much advantage, does it?
No, it doesn't. But the major issue is ordinarily the thinking is, if the minimum wage in a country is low, it will attract investors.
Entrepreneurs, I think that's the word I'm looking for.
Entrepreneurs. It's often an opinion of those that want to keep the minimum wage low. But in reality, what happens is countries with low minimum wages often have a high departure of talent into countries with high income, with high minimum wages. And what is often left will be low quality workers in the country. And that's not just my opinion, is what the data suggests. It shows that countries with very low minimum wages have very high rates of emigration.
Okay.
Countries with high minimum wages have lots of people coming into those countries.
But that's not just about minimum wage. That I'm sure would translate across, the board in terms of especially high-skilled workers. That's where you have a highly skilled worker.
Highly skilled workers.
That's where you find, a brain drain of some sort. I mean, we're all complaining about that at some point because the working environment would also not be very, very supportive. But I want to focus again on the efforts of government, because government has acknowledged that it did inherit a backlog. 5.3 million is what they put it at, unemployed people. They say every year they have 1.8 million, churned out every year as people who are looking for jobs. Out of that, they say they have been able to create 1.6, so they leave 200,000 unemployed every year, in addition to the backlog. And a lot of people will say that these could be conservative figures. How would you rate their efforts at creating employment so far?
For the man on the street that has no job, for the lady that is working in a company where her skills aren't put to best use, would rate the government very low. What the youths want is not just lower unemployment rates, which isn't happening right now. What they need also are better jobs. And there are ways to create these jobs, which we've explained.
You are an entrepreneur. How did you come about your, getting into this line of work? How would you also rate the mind of the average youth in terms of wanting to go, to go it alone, so to speak?
It comes down to the type of education the average youth has. It comes back to the type of education. If the average youth isn't well educated, his options are limited. However, there are certain states that have been able to create a hub that makes it possible for entrepreneurs like me to grow. And a classic example is Lagos State. In Lagos State, you have the highest number of SMEs in the agricultural sector. In Lagos State, you have the highest number of SMEs in the building and construction sector. In Lagos State, you have the highest number of SMEs in the hotel sector.
Is that something that the government is doing by itself, or is something that is happening on its own?
Well, clearly, we cannot disconnect the opportunities in Lagos State from what the governor is doing. You cannot disconnect the opportunities in Lagos State also from what the party is doing. A state that has over 880,000 micro businesses, far larger than any other states in the country, clearly has been influenced by what the state governor or the party has done. Okay. But more importantly, other states need to follow this model, and that's a very simple model. Ensure that you keep labor in your states, and also ensure that you do enough to attract new workers into your state.
And I reckon electricity will be key in all of this, because at the time, in 1981 and now, population was different, electricity supply was a little different, and then those who were accessing it was different. So, but data is data, isn't it?
Infrastructure has its role to play. We also have to really go back to history and find out what we did to keep unemployment rate low then.
All right, Babajide Ogunsawo is a data and information analyst. Thank you for coming on this morning.